The Fountain of Pioneers has been around since 1940. For 78 years in total, it is surrounded by other forms of art and architecture, such as the Vietnam War and the Korean War, and much more. Since its construction, the fountain has been believed to be a part of history and an identification to Kalamazoo, and has been added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. As of 2017, it has become the topic of controversy, argued that it glorifies Manifest Destiny and the removal of Native Americans in 1830. For at least a year, the controversy has gone on for a while between two sides. No city commission meeting was taken until 2018 to finally make a decision. Due to this controversy, a decision was made in 2018 in a 5-1. Following this decision, the fountain is planned to be removed around Memorial Day of 2018. Disassembly started for the fountain after a few weeks in the decision, and has also occurred with other pieces of art nearby in the same park. But this focus won't be on the controversy. This focus will be on the fountain's history. Who built it? What's its origin?
Fountain of the Pioneers, it isn't the original fountain in Bronson Park in Kalamazoo. The history of Bronson Park goes back to the 19th century with Titus Bronson, and the park itself is really a product of a larger trend that we see throughout the United States in the 19th century known as Greensward planning or City Beautiful, right? And it was the idea that cities throughout the United States, I mean, the Industrial Revolution took a pretty massive toll on the American landscape. We also see, huge amounts of immigrants coming into the United States, living in crowded housing, etc. And cities like New York City, Chicago, Illinois, they were slated with the task of cleaning themselves up, right? The idea of kind of progress and human betterment, but also creating recreation activity for all Americans, not just native born, not just upper class, but really all Americans to kind of partake in and enjoy themselves. And what we see come from this is the great park building phase really in the United States. Central Park, Grant Park, Forest Park in St. Louis, Missouri. These are all some of the original major parks that kind of set this trend. And Bronson Park it was part of the process of that City Beautiful and Greensward planning, that the park itself was built as kind of a focal point to the town, right? I mean, today the churches, a lot of the churches are still around there. There was a jail at one point in time, and it was kind of the central place for Kalamazoo, and it was a recreational area for all people to kind of go enjoy. And in doing that, again, part of America's preservation history, and we can really look at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. as kind of the idea behind this, that these parks served as not just great places where Americans could recreate, but also landscapes through which Americans could remember their past.
The Fountain of the Pioneers is the third fountain in Bronson Park. The previous one that had been installed in 1927 was really very nice at night. It had colored lights and spray, and people really liked it. During the day, they thought it looked like a silo. So there was a campaign in the 1930s to put a new fountain in, and the city approached an organization called the Kalamazoo Professional Business Women's Club or Group. They decided to come up with the funds, and they also then put out a request for proposal for a new fountain in Bronson Park. A student by the name of Marceline Gogler from Chicago submitted her design, and it was accepted. It was found that there were problems with this fountain, and so one of the people who stepped in was her teacher, Alfonso Iannelli, an artist also located in Chicago. What resulted was not a revised plan of Ms. Gogler's fountain, but a whole new design that was called the Fountain of the Pioneers, which was designed by Alfonso Iannelli. It was installed in 1939 and dedicated in 1940.
Iannelli himself, he was an Italian immigrant. He studied with Frank Lloyd Wright. And at the time, obviously, he was a fairly well-known contemporary architect and artist, and he is today. I mean, he still is a fairly well-known and important architect.
You can see some of his work on buildings still to this day. So exterior decorations that you might see, details on exteriors of buildings, whether it be doorways, window detail, entrances, things like that. He wasn't an architect, he was an artist. One of the pieces that still exists to this day, there's a building, it used to be called the Prudential Building in downtown Chicago, and Prudential's symbol was the rock over in Gibraltar, and so you can see at least one piece of that. But Iannelli did a lot of his work during the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so there's a lot of Art Deco influences, which you can see in this fountain. Very linear, very geometric, a lot of emphasis, and you can see the impact of like the Mayan, Egyptian designs, that type of thing. Fortunately, we know what Iannelli's concept of this fountain was because he did write things down. Specifically, he wrote things down for the public library at that time. I'm not going to repeat it verbatim, but I know what he was trying to project was the pioneer settlers pushing to the west, and what he called, unfortunately, it was a term that was probably accepted back then, the noble savage, trying to, in some way, whether it be resist or confront the oncoming settler.
What he tried to portray was the coming of the settlers to move into this area and to move into the West, and that the Native American people who they were displacing were unable to stop that. And so he took the image of a settler with a stick, holding a stick, and a Native American person below him looking into his heart, as if to ask, why are you doing this and what are you doing? And the settler very firmly looking toward the west, signifying that they were going and they weren't going to stop. And I think he is a person who has a history of great empathy for Native American people. And I think he was trying to portray the pain that the Native Americans were feeling, and at the same time, the intransigence of the white and the inevitability of the white settlers going through.
Now, what's interesting about the fountain, design-wise, is when you look at it, the Native American figure has a headdress that is not something that you would see in the Midwest. Iannelli had been out west, had been with the Sioux Nation, and so that's one of the reasons why when you see the headdress, it looks something that looks a little more for the Native Americans that lived out west and the Native Americans that were here in the Midwest. But it was interesting when you look at the position of the fountain, because Iannelli positioned it so that the figure of the pioneer or the settler literally is pushing the Native American to the west. Now, exactly, specifically for what reason he did that, well, it could have been many. One of the things that has been said about this is that one of the policies in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, in the Midwest, was a relocation policy. This was first started in the 1820s, but really picked up speed in the 1830s and definitely by 1840. And that's where a number of Native Americans from the Midwest, especially Michigan, were forcibly removed from the area and sent to reservations out west on the other side of the Mississippi. So whether or not Iannelli was reflecting that or just the general idea of the settlers pushing and continuing to push the Native Americans west, I don't specifically know, but he certainly did try to get across that idea.
There are a couple things going on with Alfonso Iannelli's design. First, studying with Frank Lloyd Wright, and at the time in which it was built, the Fountain of the Pioneers is a really superb example of both Art Deco and prairie style, Frank Lloyd Wright being kind of the innovator of what came to be known as the prairie style of architecture. Alfonso Iannelli, he himself was an immigrant to the United States and really wanted to kind of encapsulate at that point in time the state of America, American progress. And the fountain kind of became his platform through which he could examine that history of American progress. And the fountain itself depicts a Native American in a full kind of Plains Indian headdress, the popular version of or image of the Native American through mass media, film, etc. Also very stereotypical, right? So we have the Native American who's facing east, and then the fountain platform itself, some have described it as a boat, some have described it as a plateau, but then on that platform you have the pioneer, right, who has a very long beard, and he's holding in his hand either a walking stick or a staff. Some have said that it's a club or a sword, right? But he's holding kind of an elongated object, and the pioneer is facing west, right? And the two are butted right up against one another. The pioneer standing on the platform, elevated a bit more above the native's head, and then kind of overlooking into the horizon west, right? And the idea behind it is it's a symbol of westward expansion, westward progress. And again, some have articulated that, it's a glorification of manifest destiny, that it's a glorification of the removal of Native Americans. And it is very true that Bronson Park was built on tribal land, on Potawatomi land, right? But Iannelli himself, he argued and noted that he wanted to kind of create this monument that encapsulated the idea of kind of American progress up to that point in time, specifically with Kalamazoo, right? And the idea is that, for better or worse, right? I mean, it is what it is. Kalamazoo would not exist had it not been for that history, right? And that history came with a cost. It took land from people who lived on this land. And, Iannelli himself recognized that, right? This is where America is today. Kalamazoo is, at one level, the embodiment of American progress in 1939, 1940, when it was dedicated. And that, it did come with a cost. That American progress, where America is by the 1930s, 1940s, it exists. It's an industrial powerhouse, but it did come with a cost that there were people here beforehand. And, Iannelli really did address that. The ultimate decision was to keep the fountain, move forward with the renovation process. And, that really brings us to where we are today, that once the city of Kalamazoo put forward a Bronson Park master plan, and even before that, a committee of people to propose how the plan would take shape, right? How the fountain would be renovated and repaired, what new shape Bronson Park would take, and then also how the fountain would be reinterpreted, right? Because the fountain does lack context, and it's important to tell all of the sides of the stories as well. The fountain's a piece of art, but it represents something much larger at one level, and it's important that, because again, as a piece of modernist art, that fountain can be interpreted in a variety of ways, and it's important that all those stories be told.
A lot of people very much value it. They value it because the sculptor has a great reputation, and they think it is a valuable addition to the community. So that's one side. The other side of it is that Native Americans and people of color look at that and they see a white man with a stick standing over a person of color, and the person of color below and being, in a sense, bullied by this white man. And they believe that's not just history, that's what's happening today. And we shouldn't have this is what they think, we shouldn't have this in the park, so that when we bring our kids down here, they see images of the same thing they experience every day. And that was a controversy. There were two sides to it, And one side was saying, this is a valuable piece of art, we have to keep it here. The other side saying, this is offensive, this hurts us, this hurts our kids, we should get rid of it.
The Fountain of the Pioneers has been a fountain that, and a piece of artwork, because I want to emphasize that it is a piece of artwork that I think has been controversial from the word go. As far as the role that it plays in the history of the community, it covers a part of our history that you don't read a lot about. Currently, there is a marker in the train station that talks about the relocation of the Potawatomi from southwestern Michigan. That's about it. And I think that one would be hard pressed. I mean, there are things written in our histories about the Potawatomis that existed here. The Machiabawishi Reservation, which was established in 1821 and specifically followed the boundary of the city of Kalamazoo. But like with most reservations at that time period, as the years went on, it slowly disappeared as more and more people came to buy land. So it sort of inadvertently, I mean, I don't know, again, I mean, if he was looking more at general ideas of the relationship between settlers and Native Americans, or specifically looking at what happened in Kalamazoo, but it does cover something that not a lot of people really know about, because it's not a lot of, we don't have a lot of evidence of that around, of the relationship between the Native Americans and the community of Kalamazoo.
And there were a number of public forums on how this plan and proposal was going to go down. But ultimately, the master plan was approved by the city commission, by the people of Kalamazoo. You know, there were public forums for debate and discussion. The Machi-Benashewish band of the Potawatomi were brought in as partners to have, you know, and very open say on how they felt their own history should be presented. And then their side of the story as well. New art was and is going to be included into that process as well. Once that capital campaign and once the master plan had been approved and fundraising were underway, the controversy once again came out into the public, where a number of community members throughout Kalamazoo began to voice their concern. And I should note, not just Kalamazoo, but outside of Kalamazoo as well. But a number of individuals began to voice their concern that, again, the fountain had no place or no purpose in a public place, that it was offensive. Again, it celebrated manifest destiny, that it celebrated the removal of native peoples. And ultimately, the city commission voted to remove the fountain. So the fountain itself, even right from the start, though, it was described as a total eyesore, that it was just ugly, right? So really from its beginning, it's had controversy in various aspects since the start. But the more recent controversy really kind of hits home to the heart of the community. And ultimately, the city commission decided that it was time for the fountain to go, that it was time for the fountain to be removed.